Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to a new episode of Pakistan Zindabad. Today we are here with Season 1, Episode 39, Humanitarian Intervention, Disaster Response, and Civil-Military Coordination. How Muslim NATO Saves Lives at Scale. This episode is drawn from the book The Nuclear Umbrella, written by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir. The book clearly presents a foundational idea. True power lies not only in winning wars, but in saving lives. Earthquakes, floods, epidemics, and displacement. These claim more lives than war itself. Muslim NATO's response is not limited to sympathy alone, but is built on preparedness, rapid response, and dignified assistance. In today's episode, we will see how humanitarian power is transformed into institutional capability, so that when disaster strikes, there is no waiting.
When we talk about security, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's probably military strength, right? Tanks, jets, armies. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating idea, a new vision for security that suggests true strength isn't just about winning wars, but about saving lives. We're talking about a humanitarian framework as the very heart of a Muslim NATO.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to Pakistan Zindabad, the next world superpower. It is great to have you with us. This is episode 39. And we're continuing our deep dive into the incredible book, The Nuclear Umbrella, written by the strategist Zahir Ahmad Mir. Now, this book is packed with bold, forward-thinking ideas, and today we're unpacking one of the most powerful arguments in the entire text.
So let's just jump right in with a question that really gets you thinking. I want you to honestly consider this. What do you think is the biggest killer in the Muslim world every single year? You might think of conflicts we see on the news, geopolitical struggles, maybe even terrorism, but the source material challenges us to look past the headlines. It argues that the most relentless, most devastating enemy isn't armed with a gun. It doesn't have a flag. The answer? It's things like earthquakes, floods, devastating famines, and widespread disease. It's the silent, overwhelming force of humanitarian catastrophe.
All right, to really get our heads around this big idea, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at this crisis beyond war to understand the scale of the problem. Then, we're going to connect the dots and see why human security is national security. After that, we'll get to the solution, the Humanitarian Response Command. And finally, we'll break down the practical blueprint for saving lives to see how this thing would actually work.
Okay, first things first. We need to clearly identify the real threat we're talking about. This isn't just about isolated incidents. We are talking about a massive, recurring crisis that, year after year, causes more death and displacement than many armed conflicts, but it just doesn't get the same kind of strategic attention. It's a war being fought against nature and circumstance, and right now, the response is just not built for the fight.
So, here's the problem in a nutshell. When a disaster hits, how do we usually respond? Well, the system we have now has some major flaws. First off, it's slow. Think about it. The clock starts ticking the second an earthquake hits, but mobilization often only begins after the fact. Those first few hours are absolutely critical and they're often lost. Second, the response is fragmented. You have dozens of amazing, well-intentioned organizations rushing to help, but they're often not talking to each other. It's like a bunch of different teams trying to build a house without a single blueprint. The effort is there, but the coordination isn't. Then, of course, they're almost always under-resourced, constantly struggling for funding. And maybe most importantly, they can be externally dependent, relying on international aid which can be unpredictable and sometimes come with political strings attached.
And this slide right here, this perfectly captures the shift in thinking that's being proposed. On the left, you've got our current reality. It's reactive. We wait for the fire to start before we look for water. It's disjointed, dependent, and delayed. Now look at the right. This is the vision, a proactive architecture. Instead of reacting, you anticipate. Instead of being disjointed, you are coordinated, like a single well-oiled machine. Instead of being dependent, you become self-reliant, using regional strengths. The whole point is to be ready before the disaster even happens. It's a total game changer.
So, we've laid out the problem. But you might be thinking, okay, that's a tragedy. But why is this a national security issue? Well, this is where the argument gets really compelling. The author makes the case that viewing humanitarian crises as simple charity work is a huge strategic blind spot. Because in our interconnected world, human suffering is never contained. It's a direct threat to regional stability.
Because look what happens when a humanitarian crisis is ignored or poorly managed. It creates a domino effect. You get mass displacement, millions of people forced from their homes, creating enormous pressure on neighboring countries. This leads to political instability as governments struggle to cope, creating dangerous power vacuums. And what fills a vacuum? Often, it's extremism. Desperate, hopeless people are, sadly, fertile ground for radical ideologies. And eventually, all of these problems, the refugees, the instability, the extremism, they don't respect borders. They spill over, creating the very real risk of wider regional conflict. Suddenly, a flood in one nation becomes a security nightmare for everyone.
And that all leads us to the single most important sentence in this entire discussion, the core idea from the book, right here. Human security is national security. Let that sink in for a second. It's so simple but so profound. A country isn't secure just because its borders are strong. A country is secure when its people are secure from hunger, from disease, from the chaos of a natural disaster. This isn't a soft issue. According to this framework, it's the bedrock of real lasting security.
Okay, so if the problem is a disorganized reactive system, then the solution has to be an organized, proactive one. It's common sense, right? And that brings us to the very heart of the proposal from the book. Not just a new policy, but a new institution. A permanent, professional organization built for one purpose, to master the art and science of humanitarian response.
And here it is, the Humanitarian and Disaster Response Command, or HDRC. The two key words here are permanent and institutionalized. This is crucial. This isn't a charity you call up after a tsunami. Think of it like a fire department or a military command center. It operates 24/7, 365 days a year. It has a full-time staff of experts, it has warehouses with pre-positioned supplies, and it has response plans ready to go at a moment's notice. It's about taking our natural human compassion and turning it into an efficient, reliable, and incredibly powerful professional capability.
So an HDRC sounds pretty amazing in theory, but how would it actually work on the ground? What does it do on a Tuesday afternoon when there isn't a crisis, or in the first 6 hours after a major earthquake? Well, now we get into the nuts and bolts, the actual blueprint for how this command would function to save lives.
The real genius of the HDRC is that it wouldn't try to do everything itself. Instead, its power comes from being the ultimate coordinator, the conductor of a massive orchestra. Look at these steps. It would tap into military logistics. We're talking heavy-lift aircraft, naval ships, and engineering corps to move people and supplies on a massive scale. It would integrate the specialized knowledge of civilian relief agencies. It would have the authority to mobilize entire health systems, turning hospitals and clinics into a unified emergency medical force. It would partner with the thousands of NGOs and charities already doing incredible work, making sure their efforts are amplified, not duplicated. And finally, it would act as the single point of contact for international partners, ensuring global help is effective and efficient. It brings everyone to the same table, reading from the same playbook.
And what is the mission that drives all of this incredible coordination? It's boiled down to 3 clear, vital objectives. First, and most important, save lives fast. In a disaster, speed is everything. Every minute counts. Second, restore dignity. This is so important. It's not just about keeping people alive with food and water. It's about providing shelter, sanitation, and safety that allows people to feel human again amidst the chaos. And third, stabilize societies. This brings us full circle. By getting a crisis under control quickly and effectively, the HDRC prevents that downward spiral into instability and conflict that we talked about earlier.
So we end on this really powerful question that the author's framework leaves us with. It asks us to completely rethink what power and strength even mean in the 21st century. In a world full of complex threats, maybe the ultimate display of power isn't a military parade. Maybe it's the proven institutional ability to rush into chaos and save lives, restore hope, and build a community back from the brink. So, could compassion, when organized with strategic vision and real institutional muscle, truly be the ultimate form of security? It's a heck of a thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.
Okay, let's dive right into this. When we think of powerful alliances, we usually picture shields, right? Things built for defense, for deterrence, for military might. But today, we're going to flip that idea on its head. We're exploring what happens when the main goal isn't just about protecting borders, but about preserving human lives.
So let's just start with this one big question. What if the true measure of an alliance's power wasn't its capacity to wage war, but its incredible ability to wage peace? To rush towards chaos, not with weapons, but with help, with expertise, with hope. What if its real strength was being a lifeline?
And that brings us to a totally new kind of framework. I want you to forget the traditional military pact, just for a second. Instead, picture an organization that's built from the ground up for one single mission:
rapid, massive humanitarian response. It's a huge pivot, really, from a collective defense shield to a collective humanitarian lifeline.
Okay, so what would an organization like this actually do? Well, its power wouldn't come from tanks and jets. It would come from a super integrated set of capabilities designed to jump in during those first critical hours of a disaster. And it's all built on a foundation of 4 core pillars.
So this whole response is built on 4 interconnected pillars. You can almost think of them as the engines that drive the entire relief effort. You've got immediate medical care, getting the infrastructure back online, logistics, and of course, coordination. Let's break down what each one of these really means.
First up, the most immediate need, saving lives. And we're not just talking about first aid kits here. We are talking about the ability to deploy entire field hospitals, complete with specialized trauma and burn units right into the heart of a disaster zone. It means having epidemic control teams ready to go to stop a health crisis from turning into a total catastrophe. And of course, the ability to airlift the most critical patients to safety. This is the absolute front line of the lifeline.
But, saving lives is really just the beginning. A community can't recover if it's completely cut off, without any basic services. And that's where the infrastructure recovery piece comes in. This is the heavy lifting, clearing debris, repairing bridges and roads, getting power and clean water back up and running, and building temporary shelters. It's about rebuilding a society's foundation so it can actually stand on its own 2 feet again.
Next, we've got the part you don't always see, but it's the absolute backbone of any relief effort, logistics. I mean, having the aid is one thing. Getting it to the people who desperately need it is a whole other challenge. This means having the capacity for massive airlifts and sea lifts, sophisticated warehouses, even with cold chains for medicine, and building those crucial last-mile delivery networks, all while tracking every single item to make sure it gets where it's supposed to go.
So how do you get all these moving parts to work together seamlessly? You do it through something called civil-military coordination cells. Think of this as the mission's nerve center. It's designed to take the incredible speed and organizational power of military-style logistics and blend it with the deep, on-the-ground expertise of civilian aid workers and NGOs. This prevents different groups from accidentally tripping over each other, and, most importantly, it builds trust by making sure the mission stays purely 100% humanitarian.
So we've got the capabilities, the what, but honestly, the how is just as important. Any action this organization takes would be governed by an incredibly strict set of ethical rules, because in this line of work, trust is literally everything.
These guiding principles are absolutely non-negotiable. Every single operation has to be guided by the consent of the host nation. It has to be neutral, it has to be impartial, the leadership stays in civilian hands, not political ones. And on the flip side, there are things that can never happen. The mission can't be politicized, it can't be militarized. This aid is a tool for humanity, not some kind of weapon of influence.
All right, so we've seen all the components and the principles that hold it all together. Now let's see what this actually looks like on the ground when a crisis hits. Let's run through a couple of scenarios and see how this lifeline would actually be put into action.
Okay, scenario 1, a massive earthquake strikes. The clock is ticking. Within just 12 hours, fully equipped field hospitals are being airlifted in. At the exact same time, engineering crews are on the ground clearing roads so that medical teams and vital supplies can actually get through. That speed, that coordination, it helps stabilize the entire region and it stops a terrible situation from spiraling completely out of control.
Now picture this, widespread flooding, forcing thousands and thousands of people from their homes. The immediate response is a 1-2 punch. First, you deploy temporary shelters and massive water purification units to provide the absolute basics for survival. And at the same time, your epidemic control teams are activated, working to prevent the outbreak of waterborne diseases like cholera. You're turning a potential health disaster into a managed situation.
And what about a global health crisis, like a pandemic? Well, this framework is designed for that too. It could immediately surge surveillance and testing resources to hotspots around the world. It could create a central pool for critical medical supplies, like ventilators or vaccines, to be distributed based on need, not politics. And it could coordinate health measures across borders to contain the spread.
And finally, let's consider one of the most complex challenges we face, a massive influx of refugees who are fleeing a conflict. This organization would work to secure humanitarian corridors, allowing civilians safe passage out of danger. And then, it would focus on establishing camps built on standards of dignity, while also providing support to the host communities to ease the burden and build solidarity.
So when you look at the capabilities, the principles, and these scenarios, you start to get to the really big idea here. This isn't just about a more efficient way to deliver aid. It's about fundamentally redefining what power and what strength really look like in the 21st century.
Which leads us to one final, really thought-provoking question.
In our interconnected world where we face all these shared threats, climate change, pandemics, mass displacement, where does true legitimacy actually come from anymore? Is it the size of your army, or is it something else entirely?
And this is the answer that's proposed. It's such a powerful and profound statement. The alliance that saves lives earns legitimacy and lasting peace. The group that consistently shows up to save lives, to alleviate suffering, to rebuild, that's the one that earns true, lasting legitimacy on the world stage. And that is how you build a more durable kind of peace.
So, at the end of the day, we come right back to where we started. We challenge that old idea of an alliance being just a shield. The ultimate vision here is to build something totally different. Not a shield against threats, but a lifeline for all of humanity, especially in its moments of greatest need.